Hey, this is Buff Bagwell, and you're watching the Card Subject Change podcast. Check it out.
Welcome back to the show!
Welcome back to the show!
And now, your hosts of the Card Subject to Change podcast, the For Frequency's Sake Tag Team Champions of the World, the Wizard CZ, and Never Wrong Nick Bull.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another exciting edition of the Card Subject to Change podcast, the podcast by the fan, for the fan. So happy you have found us. So happy you have joined us. We're here to talk wrestling. Have a great time, as always. I am your host, Never Wrong Nick Bull. Glad to be part of the For Frequency's Sake Network. And speaking of the For Frequency's Sake Network and the Card Subject to Change podcast, I would be remiss if I did not introduce to you my tag team partner. We are co-champs of the said For Frequency's Sake Network. He is the one. He is the only. He is the Wizard CZ. But if he was in AAA, he would be the Wizard Doctor. Dr. Wizard.
Dr. Wizard.
Dr. Wizard. Yep. That's your AAA gimmick. You're Dr. Wizard in AAA.
That works for me, man. That works for me.
You hear me loud and clear, okay?
Yeah, you sound good. You look good.
Well, that's a given. That's a given. The sun comes up in the east. What you just said, the sun sits in the west. That's just a given, right?
Absolutely, man. And we've got a great show lined up. Before we get to that, of course, we've got to mention our fantastic sponsors. We are powered by Lopez Pizza, built by Durham Remodeling, and colored by Ryan Allison Tattoo. And I'll just give a quick mention. The window is still open if you want to play some fantasy football. I'll throw the QR code up for a little bit. But the Toys for Tots for fantasy sake, Toys for Tots Bowl. If you want to play fantasy football, I think our leagues are almost full, Nick. I know mine is. I think you maybe have a spot or two left in yours. So
they are filling up fast, of course. That is the QR code that you want to scan if you want to join along, play along with the likes of Never Wrong Nick Bull or the Wizard CZ.
Or you can go to FFSQC on Facebook and you can sign up that way.
Correct. If you can't get in the league with us, we'll get you set up in a league with somebody else. But we are looking forward to this. We have not done this. You played last year. I'm playing this year. So this is kind of the first year the show has collectively done it. So
yes,
this will be interesting. Talking fantasy football. I'm doing a draft right now in another league that's going on from guys all over the country. It's been going on for the past week, and we're about wrapped up. So, yeah, it's that time of the year. It's right around the corner. And if you're a wrestling fan like myself, like CZ, and if you like football like myself, CZ, you didn't even know too much or really care too much about football. You played last year.
Still don't know a damn thing.
Even better. But yeah, that's make sure you click on the QR code that CZ had up earlier and or sign up on the league page.
Absolutely. But that's enough about that, right, Nick?
Yes, we've got all the formalities, requirements, rules, regulations checked off. And now it's time to bring in our guest. Before we bring him in, you and I know this gentleman, this individual from our time together when we worked at the TV station. This gentleman worked in a different department of the TV station, but we talked to him all the time. Of course, we all had the love for wrestling in common. And then finding out that this gentleman wrestled and has some stories to tell. Made it all even better. This guy is a great dude, a great guy to talk to. He's got a great wrestling mind, And of course, he's a friend of ours, so he is also going to be a friend of yours if you accept him and love him. That's how I wanted to introduce him. CZ, what do you want to say about him?
I'm excited to hear his stories, whether he's working TV, running away with the circus, or talking wrestling. He's, like you said, he's a good friend of ours. Let's bring him on in, Mr. Ripley Von Slam. Ripley, how you doing, my friend?
I'm just trying to figure out who you guys have coming in other than me, because like all those nice things, I'm like, well, I mean, okay. So
well, we've had Buff Bagwell on, the Headbangers. I mean, you're right up there with those guys.
No, just the whole nice. He's a nice guy and gentleman, and
sure, man. Dude,
he has manners and.
Well, I mean, perception's reality. No, I'm just kidding you. No, we wanted to have you on, Ripley, and thank you for being here. And I ask every first-time guest this when they come into the studio, and I'm going to ask you the same question: why pro wrestling? What was it that got you to be like, "Oof, I need more"?
Well, you know what? Here's the thing, and I tell my kids this all the time. I'm like, have experiences out in the world, learn about things that you're interested in, because you never know where they're going to lead you. So we're going to go way back, okay? So my maternal grandfather was a huge wrestling fan, and apparently even growing up, this is in the Pittsburgh area, okay? So apparently they were to that point where if the television was on, it was either on news or it was on wrestling. And so as a result, like my mother, definitely not what I would say is a fan, but grew up knowing who people like Don Eagle were and Gorgeous George. Oh my gosh, he hated Gorgeous George. And so as a result, when my grandparents would come to visit, I would always make sure to have the wrestling on. And I wasn't necessarily into it. I knew what it was. And we're talking here about like 84, 85-ish. Okay. So I'm a kid. And very slowly but surely, I did what everybody else does. I found like one or two wrestlers to latch onto. And it's interesting for me to find out who people's like initial wrestlers were, because I think it says a lot about their personalities. So the very first one that I really kind of latched onto was George Animal Steel. And I believe he was a heel at the time, but I just thought it was so much fun how he would rip the turnbuckles apart and how he had the green tongue and he would attack people. And then from there, I started watching a little bit more, because it would turn into the wrestling would be on, grandparents and my parents were in another room, and I would keep running back and reporting what was going on with George Animal Steel. And then eventually I kind of latched on a little bit more to Roddy Piper. Not as a fan necessarily, but I knew that my grandmother hated Roddy Piper. And like she told me, she said, "Oh, I hate him." Because, if you're in the household where the television's on and it's either news or wrestling, whether or not you plan to be a wrestling fan, you're going to pick up some stuff. So I kind of really started watching a little bit more, not what I would call like as a fanatic. I had a family member who had gone to a wrestling show, I think in Chicago, and gave me a program just, because they got it and they thought I would enjoy it. And I very distinctly remember this gives you kind of the timestamp on it. You know how they always had like on the back, they would have the grid with all the different superstars. Mm-hmm. And I remember on the back, and then also they did an interview with King Tonga. And most people would know King Tonga better as Haku or Meng. And I started to kind of like latch onto him just a little bit, because I was like, this guy's kind of cool. And they weren't pushing now how they do it. Everybody that they talk to, they're like, oh, he's the toughest man I've ever known, but he's also the nicest guy I've ever known. I thought that was kind of interesting. So little by little, I kept sort of latching a little bit more on. And I remember the night of WrestleMania 2. And I wasn't fully into the wrestling yet, but I cared enough that I wanted to know who won between Hulk Hogan and King Kong Bundy. And my brother had some friends come over, and they had just seen it. And I was like, oh, my God, who won the main event? Right? And so they told me, and I was like, oh, that sucks because I always hated Hulk. And that's one thing that has always been like the through story for me is never a Hulkamaniac. Never. I just didn't like it. I thought it was too much. I thought it was too much for like the goody two shoes. And as luck would have it, the next year I went to my very first live show at the Indiana State Fair. You get one guess who was in the main event, as far as like who was like one of the people in the main event.
Hogan.
It's Hogan, right? Now, he was taking on Killer Khan, and I don't know how many people remember Killer Khan, but I liked Killer Khan a lot because I always liked the heels. And even though I knew deep down in my heart there wouldn't be a title change, part of me was going, please, God, listen to my prayer. Please let Killer Khan win the title tonight. And spoiler alert, he did not. Pretty standard Hogan match. I will say this, though, about Hulk. And some people go, who was it that really is responsible for the explosion of wrestling? And I definitely think Hulk had a lot to do with it. I think, the McMahons had a lot to do with it. I think it was that kind of like perfect storm of them coming together that I've heard people speculate, well, if it wasn't going to be Hulk, who was it going to be? And I've heard Sergeant Slaughter and I've heard Dusty Rhodes and things like that. I don't know that we would have had, even today, kind of the explosion we did without Hulk. And I will give it to him from there. Now, everything he did to me was a complete cliche. But little by little from there, I got hooked. Okay? And I would say one of the biggest moments of my teenage life was WrestleMania 3. And you also got to keep in mind, I lived in a small town in Indiana, so we didn't have closed circuit. I don't even think we had pay-per-view. Like you would have to drive a couple hours away to be able to go see the show. So I had to wait and hear what happened. And to this day, if somebody goes, why are you a wrestling fan? The match I will show them is Savage and Steamboat from WrestleMania 3.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
No matter what. And, yes, there have been great matches since then, but that was, to me, the one that kind of like set the standard. And I still can very much, with a clear conscience, go, watch this, and you might understand. And as I've gotten older, I'll watch a show like that and pick up on little things from that same show that I go, these guys were really good. A case in point is opening match, Can-Am Connection, Rick Martel and Tom Zink, nice hat.
I had to.
Yeah. I think you got the last of that fabric.
I tell everybody about it because I get asked about it, but you tell your story. We'll talk about this hat a little later on.
But here's what I think. If you've never really sat there, and the more I learned about wrestling down the line, the more they always say, tell the story. That was such a great opening match to me. It's never going to go down as like one of the best matches in history, but opening up a show, what you want to do, and I had so many promoters tell me this, they're like, start big, get people's attention right away. A lot of times people think opening match, you put the people who suck in it. No, you put them a little bit more into it. You want to get people's attention right away and go, if you've never seen us before, here's what we do. Here's the quality of our product. If you watch that match, so again, it was Can-Am Connection, Rick Martel, Tom Zink, which they didn't last much longer than that, and Magnificent Morocco and Cowboy Bob Orton, who is still one of my favorites. They just put on a great match, and there was just a lot of the kind of the chicken heel stuff going on. There was the red hot babyface stuff going on. Such a great way to open up the show. And then as a kid, as a teen, I always looked at the one match that was before Hogan and Andre. That was Nikolai Volkov and the Iron Sheik against the Killer Bees, and it was a short match. That's where Hacksaw Jim Duggan kind of got his big on the major stage, and it was like a DQ, and it was pretty short, and I'm going, this match, I mean, it's okay, but it kind of sucks. And the more I learned about the sport, I realized that's okay, because if your emotions are a roller coaster and you're already getting excited for Hogan and Andre, you got to calm down before they come out, or you're not going to have anything left. So if you watch, especially a show like that, there's a lot of this. And that match right before it, it brought people down. So then they were ready for Hogan and Andre. So I would say that was probably like the biggest show that got me cemented as a wrestling super fan.
Okay.
Totally followed it all through high school, junior high, but I never thought that I would necessarily do it. You know, you would have your little fantasy leagues I would put on and stuff like that, and come up with names and, you know, try to like have our own little league. But I never necessarily thought that it was something I was going to do. Now you fast forward, here's where I go back to what I said at the beginning of the show. I tell my kids all the time, do the things you want to do, that you want to learn about, because you never know where it's going to lead you. So when I was 14, I had everything figured out. I was going to be working in radio. I was going to go to college for it. And I was pretty much on target for that. I worked in radio, worked in television, had my communications degree. When I was in college, though, I used that to my advantage, because at that time, WCW was nowhere near being a powerhouse. They had a wrestling show at our local minor league baseball stadium. And I'm going to tell you the talent that was on there. You're not going to believe me, but it's very true.
I can't wait.
In the summer, okay.
Give us the year. Give us the year. What year are we looking at here?
This would have been about like summer of like 93-ish.
Okay.
And all right. Can't remember all the matches.
And the show is where? Where's the show at?
Burlington, North Carolina.
Okay.
Minor league baseball team. So the one match, you're not going to believe me, was Eric Watts, who was the son of Bill Watts. He was getting a huge push. He took on and went over on Chris Benoit. And
Wow.
this is back when Chris Benoit was wearing like the purple tights with kind of like the tiger stripes.
Okay.
He was fairly new into the country. He had been doing a lot in Japan.
Yep.
Even then, like, I already knew who he was, but as an audience, we were all like, how is Eric Watts beating this guy? No. But the funny thing is I had made arrangements beforehand. I took all my gear from the college and I interviewed Eric Watts. And just about, you know, hey, what's it like being here where we haven't had wrestling in a while? That town actually became kind of a hotbed and still sort of is. I mean, there's been a lot of stuff going on there. So trying to remember all the matches, but like Junkyard Dog was there. I don't remember who he wrestled. Maybe like Buddy Lee Parker or something. But the one that I still remember was from the Horsemen, Arn Anderson and Paul Roma.
Whoa.
They had just had him in there against the Hollywood Blondes, Flying Brian Pillman,
Stunning Steve
and
Austin.
Stunning Steve Austin. Those guys tore it up. Like, I've always been kind of like a Stone Cold fan, and I liked him as Stunning Steve, and I knew who he was, and I followed him in Texas. But he was so good at getting the heat that I was like, I hated him, right? And I hated Pillman, but deep down I liked them both. So anyway, so I had been seen by a couple people with my equipment there, like interviewing Eric Watts, taking some footage and stuff like that. And then I ended up having a couple people somehow get my phone number. And one of which we talked for a while, nothing really ever happened. But another one that I did connect with, really, I will say, is the person most responsible for getting me in. And he knows that I feel this way. His wrestling name was Tim Blaze, Tim Woody. And because he was like, hey, we run shows locally, which I'd been to a couple of theirs. He goes, we'd like to get a commercial made. Is that something you could do? And I was like, of course. I'm like a 19-year-old college kid. Of course I can make a wrestling commercial. So we just basically took, it was off of VHS, you know, all cuts, nothing fancy, but made a couple commercials for their upcoming shows. And I said, he goes, how much is this going to cost? So I said, you don't need to pay me anything, but can you get me on one show? Because that was my thing. I was like, I just want to be on one show. Something I've always wanted to do. Can I please be on a show? So, okay, yeah, absolutely. So, like, he was local. So we ended up, I forget, like within an hour's drive. And what they had for me was a real basic thing. Tim had been in, if you remember, the Italian Stallion and George South. They had their organization, the PWF, for years. And they kind of had like a revolving door of generic gimmicks that like anybody could do.
Right.
They had like Star Rider, Flaming Youth, Russian Assassin, stuff like this. So Tim had been traveling with them as Flaming Youth. So he goes, got something for you, perfect. He goes, beginning of the show, you're going to come out. You're going to, you know, say that you're representing Flaming Youth, and you're going to like sell the contract or whatever. I probably wasn't even up there for 5 minutes, but in my mind, I didn't care. And the stuff that I put together for my costume, I look back and I go, I'm surprised that they ever wanted me back. It was like kind of weird. I was wearing like a cape from a Halloween costume, and I had like a big poofy like poet type shirt and like black riding pants, and I had like these black riding boots, and I wore sunglasses, of course, because every good manager should. And they gave me a name, and it was the worst name ever. And it was Sonic R. Boom, which, if anybody wants it, you can have it. Probably have it since then. And I thought that was going to be the end of it. But then they were like, well, you know, do you want to come back? We've got a show here next month or whatever. And so little by little, they kept using me more on shows. And from that, after that first show, though, I was like, I got to come up with a better name because I'm not going to be Sonic R. Boom. So, so I was like, I want to come up with a really fake name, like that doesn't even sound real. There was a wrestler in the South, and he did like some TV matches for WCW, and he went by two different kind of names. It was like Skull Von Cruz, and he also went by Skull Von Crush. And I was like, that's kind of a cool name, the Von, because I'm German. So I was like, I could do something with that. How about Von Slam? And I was going to be Professor Von Slam, but I was like, no, that doesn't really fit me. And I've always been a fan of Ripley's, believe it or not. So then, you know, I added the Ripley to there. And little by little, they just kept using me more. And it was always like you would show up on a lot of these shows. And that's the thing. If you don't show up, you're never going to get used. They'd be like, why don't you go out with this guy? Why don't you be this manager? Because it was good for me to go out with a lot of these guys. Because back then, they weren't super big. Nowadays, you got cruiserweights and it's not a problem. But back then, people expected wrestlers to be huge. So whoever I went out with, I just made them look bigger. Okay.
Mhm.
And I really didn't have the training. Like, they taught me how to take a couple of bumps and eventually how to like lock up and stuff like that when I needed to know how to do it. I just would go out there and I would kind of be like the funny heel that smiled, and like I wouldn't, if I heard somebody use a line, I tried not to use it because I was like, no, I don't want somebody to go, oh, I just heard this wrestler do it. So I kind of, just went more with my natural personality. And little by little, they just kept giving me more. And then, it would get to that point where one of the wrestlers was like, hey, group of us is going up to Ohio to wrestle. Are you available? Sure. And so, I would travel, get to know people, and work in different areas, and then eventually get connected to wrestle in, well, we don't call it this anymore, but midget matches. So it was like a progressive thing that I was just like, I'm going to do this as long as I can. I want to have fun doing it. And if I'm not going to have fun, I'm not going to stick with it. Which is a horrible way, I guess, to like approach anything. Like, if I'm not having fun, I'm going to quit.
Right.
But to me, it was like, I have nothing to lose, because realistically, the odds are against me. If I just kind of like treat it kind of as a hobby, like, I'll do it on the weekends and stuff. But the more I did it, though, what was really cool back then was the big deal was you'd have like all your local guys, but then would bring in like a big name person. And so getting to like meet and work with some of these stars who had just been out of like, the WWF or WCW for a couple years, you get a little starstruck. But sometimes getting to work with them and like one of the biggest like surreal moments of my life was when I realized I'm driving around Ricky Morton. I was like, how is this possible? So, I got to meet like Jimmy Valiant. I actually had my very first match wrestling against Jimmy Valiant and his part. It was a tag match. And just
And how'd that go? And
I was
how'd
horrible.
that go?
I was not trained. I was not ready. I didn't know how to hit the ropes. Like, they were just like,
Okay.
It was a deal where it was like in Ohio, and they were like, this is at a campground. Do you want to go? You want to do it? We're going to stay at my family's house. It's not going to cost you anything, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, sure, why not? And I like had some quick tights made up and stuff. And I barely knew how to lock up. And like talking through stuff, I just got so confused. And just the match itself was awful. It was all comedy stuff because it was Jimmy Valiant, and then who's a sweetheart, and then this guy Super Mario, who was legitimately from Italy and had lived in like West Virginia and had a couple restaurants. He was a nice guy. He looked like Super Mario. And then against,
If you tell me his tag team partner is Luigi, I'm going to tell you to get the hell out of here.
no, but it was funny because he had been on like USWA and some other places, but they teamed me with this guy that I had met and worked with before. That his gimmick was that he was supposed to be Big John Studd's son, and so Big John Studd legitimately did have a son who became a wrestler, and this guy was just a big dude that looked like they could be related. So it was like this guy who's well over, like close to 7 feet tall or whatever, 400 some pounds, and me against Jimmy Valiant and Super Mario, who's not much taller than me and weighs probably, at least twice as much as I did. So the match was horrible.
Sure.
But at least I was like, well, I got that out of the way. And then once we kind of established that I wasn't going to kill myself, then they started showing me some more stuff, and we would work stuff in, like, me as a manager match. And I met on the show I mentioned doing the midget wrestling thing. Bad Boy Buck. We ended up working a lot together and kind of traveling here and there and doing some matches. And like, he always went over because he was smaller than me, so it just made sense. And he was legitimately, he had dwarfism, a certain type of dwarfism. So, you know, I would try to hide kind of that I'm not like your standard type with dwarfism. I would do a lot of like different character stuff. I would, you know, Little Frankenstein, Little Leatherface, Little Von Slam, and I would wear a mask and stuff like that. So it was just, you know, it was just me having a lot of fun, realistically. And then the more that went on, though, it was really interesting to be part of the wrestling scene where I was during that time, because that's also the time when Omega started becoming a big thing in North Carolina, and the Hardys were becoming stars, and like all the guys that they worked with. And I was never on an Omega show because I'm not athletic enough and I would add nothing to that show, but they were on a lot of shows that I was. So, you know, getting to talk to them and just, you know, just shooting the breeze with them, getting to know these guys that all went on to, you know, the big organizations, and they probably don't remember me. There one or two probably would, like Shane Helms probably would, because we had some other mutual friends. But it was like such an interesting time to be involved with it. But then I got to that point in my life where I was looking at what I was doing for a living. I was single. I wanted more out of life. I wasn't career-wise getting what I wanted. And so I just decided to move to Iowa and basically said goodbye to the wrestling, which I ended up reconnecting with a couple years down the line as a referee. But for the most part, you know, my wrestling stuff is all back in the Carolinas and the Virginias and all that kind of stuff. But at least I can say that I did it. I had more than one person after the fact say, we knew you weren't going to make it because you're too nice of a guy, which is very true. I would not have done well on a full-time basis living that lifestyle. But again, I got to do it. And for the most part, I got to do what I wanted. You know, I wasn't looking to get pushed and like make it in one of the big organizations. I mean, I think the only way that I ever would have been signed by anybody is just based on my personality, because it wasn't based on my athleticism and it wouldn't be based on my body or anything like that. It just would have been the personality.
Which that's not a bad thing. You know, you
Wow.
look at
That's not a bad, you know, well, what you lack in size, you make up for in
Yes.
personality. There's no doubt about that. I didn't mean to cut you off there when you were talking about the names that you worked with, but you said Jimmy Valiant was your first tag team partner. Who were some of the other guys that you worked with on these shows?
Okay.
That, you know,
so as far as me teaming with or going against, and I would also, I would also include if I'm managing like somebody or a team.
Yep.
So
Yep.
Jimmy Valiant, I did get to manage the Hollywood Dream Team against Rock and Roll Express. And let's see, I actually got to team with Ricky Morton. We had like a 6-man match, and I was doing a Dudley gimmick.
Were you Ripley Dudley?
No, I was trying to go in a completely.
Okay.
That was one of the things I tried to do. Is like, even if people like maybe thought that I was the same person, I wanted to like kind of eliminate that possibility in their head. So my character was Half Pint Dudley.
Oh.
Which, I mean, even Rick.
Do you have any pics? From that era?
I think on my Facebook page, there's one in there.
I'll have to look for it. Dude, that's I love it.
You know, and so as far as like people that I managed Shaska Watley, who was Pistol Pez Watley. He was one of the main trainers at the WCW power plant. Quite a bit managed him, actually. And I managed Ron Reese, who more people know as the Yeti.
Now,
So he
all
wasn't
right.
the Yeti, but he was like part of Raven's flock at the time.
Okay.
And that was interesting
Yep.
because he is over 7 feet tall, legitimately.
Okay.
So that was kind of a neat visual. I managed the Barbarian quite a bit from the Powers of Pain. It's really tough for me to remember sometimes because back then, like, I hate to say this, but I think it's common knowledge. For the most part, most people consider kayfabe to be dead. But back then, it was alive and well. And so it was like, people would always be like, don't take pictures with people. You don't want that to get out. You don't want them to know that you guys don't actually hate each other. So I have a lot of opportunities that I wish I would have gotten pictures with. Did a show with Jake the Snake Roberts. I didn't work with him, but that would have been really cool to get a picture with him. And this was before he left and had his first big kind of like personal demon thing going on. There's a lot of, like I said, there's so many people that went on to become huge stars. The Hardys, Shane Helms, drawing a blank here because I'm trying to think what they went on to become. But like a couple they were pretty young at the time. Became Joey Mercury. Was on shows with him. I did a thing with another guy, Joey Matthews, who was kind of similar to Joey Mercury. And it was funny because we went out and then I did a thing and I went up behind him and like, you know, he's supposed to be surprised when he turns around and sees me and he like pushes me and like I went flying backwards basically. And when we got back to the back, he legitimately thought he hurt me. I was like, no, dude, I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm absolutely fine. So there's like so many guys that went on to become like huge stars. Joey Abs from the Mean Street Posse. The guys that were the Dups in ECW. They did kind of like, it was country gimmick. It was Otto Schwanz, but he went by a different name. And I'd known Murray for a couple of years before that. He eventually he did a German gimmick, but for ECW, they were the Dups. Mike Maverick was one of the Dups. And then Champagne was one of the Dups. One of the best names ever. First name Shan, last name Payne.
Is Payne spelled P-A-Y-N?
P-A-I-N.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
So, like, sometimes it's hard for me to remember because when I worked with a lot of these guys, they weren't big stars yet. And, you know, what was cool, again, in the South, and I don't know if places still do this very much, but they would bring in stars. So, as a result, I got to meet the Fabulous Moolah, Mae Young, Diamond Lil, gotten to meet Barry Windham, through a mutual friend. It's kind of hard for me to like, again, because I don't have the pictures. Right. And that's that mentality of that time. Nowadays, I wouldn't think anything about it. Hey, let's get a selfie, you know, sort of thing.
Right.
Different time, different
We
generation.
were joined by Ripley.
Yeah.
Different place. Right. We are joined by Ripley Von Slam here on the Card Subject to Change podcast, the podcast by the fan, for the fan. Of course, we are powered by Low Pies Pizza, built by Durham Remodeling, and colored by Ryan Allison Tattoo. Ripley has been breaking it down for us, how he got into the business, so to say, some of the people he worked with. What's your favorite story, favorite thing that happened to you or you observed during that time period when you were doing all these different shows?
And here's the thing. A lot, like the really funny stuff you guys would have no way of knowing who it was. And that's half of what makes it funny. But the one that I love to tell, because everybody, you know, and I don't want to talk ill of the dead, but everybody always jokes
Right.
about Virgil, you know, lonely Virgil. Okay. So we're
big
Yeah.
Virgil fans here.
So we're in Ohio, and it's at like a fair. And initially, I think Greg Valentine was supposed to be on the show, but he decided not to make it and sent Virgil in his place and didn't tell the promoter. So Virgil just kind of shows up, right? And the promoter is actually Bobby Fulton from the Fantastics. Okay, so he knows how to do business, right? He shows up out of nowhere, and like at that point, I get it. You're just kind of like, well, he's not coming, but at least I've got, you know, a name star. And at this point, Virgil had just left about a year prior to the WWF. Okay. And now that I'm telling the story, I kind of realize, and it'll make sense here in a second, that this is very reminiscent of Mike Tyson with what's the fighter, Hezbollah? Is that his name? Okay.
Yep.
This is almost a similar story. So just a bunch of them hanging around, and he's telling stories. And I should mention King Kong Bundy was there, who was just one of the nicest people to me, who had, like, seriously, there have been a couple people that I go, you had no reason to be nice to me. Not that I'm a jerk or anything, but they were just like having regular conversations with.
Sure.
So, you know, Virgil's just going on about, he said, and I told Vince McMahon he could, you know, he should do this or he can kiss my ass. And sorry if I can't say that.
You can say it.
And just going on. And at one point, Bundy goes, you know, you need to stop living in the 80s, live in the present, blah, blah, blah. So I'm just kind of like hanging around. And like, because I've never met Virgil. I don't know him from anything. And for some reason, he comes over to me. And keep in mind, I've got facial hair. And he reaches over like you would with a little kid and does like a claw and goes, got your belly.
Oh my.
And it was so random. I think the reason why it made me laugh so much, because it was just so random. There was no setup to it.
Yeah, that is random.
No setup to it. I'm like, does he think I'm a little kid with a fake beard? I don't know. So like, that's been an inside joke with a lot of people, and like, they're always like, have you never worked with Virgil ever again? I said, no, that was the only time I ever met him. And it was like just such a random thing.
Very random.
Oh my God,
very random.
So a lot of the stuff that, like, and again, I don't want to talk ill of the dead, but Buck that I wrestled quite a bit, he passed away a few years ago. So Buck was kind of an interesting guy. His father always would travel with us because his dad had a background in promoting concerts and like managed like George Jones and Little Texas and all these things. So we're like, okay, he's going to at least make sure we don't get like completely ripped off by these promoters. But when I first met Buck, his dad took me aside and just as a warning was just like, you know, Buck, sometimes he's not all there, basically. He's like, he'll say stuff that like you wouldn't expect somebody to say, like just the way his mind would work. So there's a bunch of us traveling, and Tracy Smothers, which I never worked in a match with him, but I was in a lot of shows with Tracy, and our group would kind of, you know, we would all kind of like sometimes travel the same places. Just a great guy. and just like did it all. Okay. So one of the funniest ones about him, and I just recently got to talk to Bo James, who is a Tennessee wrestler, Kingsport. And he and I would swap buck stories basically. But Tracy Smothers had just started working for the WWF as like enhancement talent. And they called him Freddie Joe Floyd. Okay. As kind of a rib and, everything. So he had just been on TV and he had just taken on Mick Foley as Mankind. And, if you remember, Mankind's finisher was the Mandible Claw.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was this day where Buck, the entire day, all he would talk about to me was, he goes, I'm going to ask Tracy what it felt like when they put the Mandible Claw on him. I'm like, okay, what? No, I got to know. I got to know what that felt like. I'm going to ask him and I'm going to find out. And this was like an ongoing thing all day long.
Sure.
Finally, he gets up, like the momentum to ask him. And Tracy just basically goes, I don't know. He just put his fingers in my mouth and, I worked it like it hurt. And it was like such a funny thing to me that somebody who should know better, who's a wrestler, should know that, like, what do you mean? What did it feel like? This is not, he's not actually like pushing down on a nerve.
Right.
There's been a lot of funny things like that. We did in Tennessee for Bo James, right when the NWO started, we did a parody, and every week there would be new ones added of the NWO. But instead of the New World Order, it was the Jabroni World Order. And so they started out, what it started out with was there was this wrestler, Mike Cooper. Not his real name, but his gimmick name was Mike Cooper. And not a real big guy, but like lost all the time. And they were like, maybe the problem is you don't have a good gimmick. So every week they'd have him come out and do a different gimmick of something that already existed. So like he'd come out as the Sandman, or he'd come out as, the Macho Man, or this, that, or the other. And eventually they did Dollywood Hulk Cooper, the third largest thing to come out of Dollywood. Okay. So then they start building the Jabroni World Order. And instead of Hall and Nash as the outsiders, they had this team of these young guys, kind of skinny guys. Instead of the outsiders, they were the insiders, Soda Pop and Pony Boy from the Outsiders movie. And so they kept adding members.
Right.
And they like Buck, they got this wig, and instead of 6, because at the time Waltman was going by 6, they said you're 1/4 the man that 6 is, so you're Buck and a half.
Oh my gosh.
And so then we get to this point where Bo calls me up and he goes, listen, I got an idea and I want to know if you can do this, because he knew that I could do some impressions. He said, I want to know if you could do a parody of Randy Savage. And my answer literally was, Bo, I've waited my entire life for this phone call. Of course I can. Because the premise was, since we're both little, that like they would beat up Buck and kick him out, and I would be kind of the one that would have the matches with him. Okay. So I ended up designing and got a bunch of t-shirts printed, Jabroni World Order. And then I was like, I had an idea and I passed it by him, and they thought, okay, yeah, we can do that. And so on the way to a Christmas party for another promoter that we all had worked for, Count Grog, my very good friend, Brandy Wine, and I were headed to the party, and we decided to stop at like an adult establishment. And because she's like, I got to get, jokingly, I got to get some Christmas presents. So I ended up buying this I won't say what most people think it is, but it really wasn't. This was like low end. This was an inflatable woman. Okay.
Okay.
And it basically it was the equivalent of like a raft. Okay. I'm telling you, it's literally, there's nothing deviant about it at all. Legitimately. It's just a, it's like, I think they call them party dolls now, like a novel.
Yeah, it's a blow up doll. There's a blow up doll. It's a wrestler.
And so this was like, I go, I'm not going to have a problem with this because it's not like anything perverted, because it's legitimately just a blow up person. So we ended up doing it where they called me the Macho Man. And I came out to the village people, Macho Man. And I had the whole get up. But then instead of Elizabeth, my valet was Les, which was the blow up woman.
Okay.
So we do the show, and like we did a couple nights in a row. They were great. They were so much fun. But after the first show, a bunch of us decided, I'm not a drinker at all. We go to a bar in Johnson City, Tennessee, which is kind of like a big deal in that area. That's always been a big wrestling town. So we go to this bar, and it's all wrestlers, and they're like, you got to bring the doll in. I'm like, I'm not bringing the doll in, okay? No, this is not going to happen. Somehow, the doll comes in, and the rest of the night, she gets passed around, thrown around, pictures taken. People had no idea why there was this blow-up woman. And I'm like, I'm worried we're going to get kicked out, okay? And now I go, no, there's no reason to kick you out. But sometimes, like, I was never a big ribber. Like, if I rib you, it's going to be something small that you're not actually going to find out about. Because I'm going to tell somebody something about you that is so much out in left field that if you knew about it, you would probably freak out, but you're never going to find out about it. So anyway, I mean, that was one that kind of happened that was just so funny, and like it was a big hit every town that we went to. I think the thing about it is, and I understand when you've got people who are on the road with each other all the time, you have to come up with ways to entertain yourselves, and we did that in the circus too. But I think I just enjoyed being around the people I was around, that we didn't necessarily need to cause any trouble. Like, we just be funny and tell jokes and do stupid stuff on the CB on the road, and
Do you miss it?
See, the thing was, the wrestling was never on like a consistent enough basis for me to go, oh my God, it's missing. Like, I kind of knew that my last match was my last match because I was moving to Iowa. But what I had going for me was I was working with a manager, the same manager, Count Grog. I'd known him, trusted him. I knew we would have fun. And I was wrestling this real young kid. He had just turned 18. He was doing a mini Vader gimmick. And it was interesting for me because, like, I was definitely, like, the senior talent in the ring. And I was the one going, we're just going to call it when we get out there. We'll come up with a couple spots. We'll just take our time. And it was very satisfying to me because then I could never go, man, I wish we would have done this different. I got to go back and do another match. I've still come up with ideas for gimmicks all the time. Physically, I can't do it anymore. But, like, I come up with ideas of, man, it would be so funny if I did this. Or, right. If I was still working with these people, here's something we could do. I definitely see the ones that, like, they eat, sleep, and breathe wrestling and traveling on the road. and all of a sudden that's taken away, I definitely see where they can't make that disconnect, where they can't have that last match. They'll have a last match, but then they'll be like, well, that actually wasn't my last match. This is going to be my last match. I had fun. I had fun. Yes, there would be stuff I would do differently now, but I can't say that like anything was horrible.
Right. Let me ask you this on the lines of, the not being able to distinguish, this is my last match.
Mm-hmm.
You've been a performer for as long as I've known you.
Yeah.
Whether it's in wrestling, whether it's in the circus, what do you do now to scratch that performer itch?
It's really tough because right now, and I'm trying to change the situation on one of them. I've been working 2 jobs now for a couple years, so it's really tough to get it. Every once in a while, we would have things come up with Quad City Clown Troupe, but that's really no longer an organization anymore, just because a lot of our population kind of aged out of it. I look for just things that could come up. I belong to like the 501st and Rebel Legion Star Wars costuming groups. There might be something coming up. A lot of health things have come up though that kept me from doing that. As long as I'm kind of using my creative juices in one way or the other, I feel like I get some satisfaction that way. It's not the same, but it's also been interesting because like it's not like I forced it, but I feel like my kids are kind of interested in a little bit in some of it, like the clowning, and they're willing to try it, and that you get kind of a special thing from that. I don't know. I've performed all my life, but it's been different kinds of performing.
Right.
So,
And you make cool hats.
sometimes I haven't made it in a while.
I get a lot of compliments on it, man. I do. I love it.
It's interesting because there quite a bit of my clown costume stuff I make. There's that creative outlet as well with sewing. Haven't been able to do a whole lot of, but like, I don't know. I think if you're honestly, depends on what you need in your life. If you need a creative outlet for yourself, I think you're going to find it. But if you need to hear 10,000 people chanting your name or booing you, that's harder to fulfill.
Right.
Right.
And I think that's where a lot of times it depends on where the person's heart is. I've always enjoyed getting reactions out of people, whether it's laughing, whether it's confusion, stuff like that. Working as a heel, making it so they don't like me. They don't hate me, but man, they find me irritating. And a lot of that's for me. Obviously, I want a reaction,
Right.
but I don't need to hear, 50,000 people chanting my name, and I never have. Like, as far as I'm concerned, nobody would ever need to know my real name or anything about me. Just like, just judge me on what you're seeing.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm fine if people come up and say something, but I'm not the type that when I go out, I want people to recognize me. Right. I do everything I can to like make sure that they don't. There are guys that play Santa. They're one of Santa's ambassadors during the holiday season, and they can't turn it off the rest of the year. They're, full on red outfits through the year, and they're going up to kids going, "Are you being good?" Stuff like that. I don't want that. I want to be able to keep that magic like off to the side and presented when it's appropriate.
That makes sense. Yeah.
being a little bit older than CZ and I, you grew up in the VHS era. Was there a show you would rent video? What's a show you've watched repeatedly and just absolutely love?
Are you talking about wrestling?
Yeah.
So I was very lucky in that I was of the right age where ESPN was showing world-class championship wrestling every day after school.
Okay.
And like clockwork, I watched that every single day.
Oh.
And they would sometimes show the AWA, and I was also the type that I would tape every single WWF, NWA, WCW show and make sure I watch it. It's not like I kept everything on tape. There wasn't a whole lot else that I could get. But then when we moved to North Carolina, they started up, which lasted for a couple of years, originally the NAWA and became South Atlantic Pro Wrestling. And that's where a lot of big stars were getting their starts. And I ended up going to a television taping in Raleigh, North Carolina, and ended up becoming friends with a couple people on those shows. But I'm talking, the Nasty Boys were there, the Pit Bulls, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. Saw him live, meant so much to me. Cowboy Bob Orton, and believe it or not, under a different name as he was starting out, Ken Shamrock was there.
Okay.
He was Vince Torelli at the time.
Okay.
And so they had kind of that standard Mid-Atlantic type setup. They would do the interviews kind of on the plain background at the arenas, and I watched that every Saturday. And then eventually they went out of business. But I felt very lucky to be able to catch the stuff that I have just on television. And I used to do a little bit of tape trading for ECW when it was starting out. Not a lot, but I think a lot of the mainstream stuff I just made sure that I watched. And nowadays, you just got to go to your phone,
right?
I know.
You can find it.
Kids have it so easy today.
Yeah.
I know we talked about there. You're not following current product religiously, but you've got social media that you kind of grab. If you were to tune into a show today, who's going to grab your attention?
A couple of ones that I really like, and some of them I'm not even sure where they are right now. I like Danhausen.
Okay.
I like Grado. I'm not sure where he is now though. Tony Storm, I think, is brilliant. Let's see. I just have loved the whole thing with Joe Hendry. How can you not get into that? Yeah. So catchy. There's not a whole lot other than that I really kind of latch onto. To me, it's interesting though, seeing as the borders are being opened up, seeing certain things from different cultures coming into the mainstream. And we were talking about this before, how far are they going to go? AAA just kind of did a thing with their Exoticos. That's not going to be, I don't think, mainstream in America, but it's been a part of their culture for so long. And I think this whole lucha push is different than it was in the 90s, because back in the 90s, it was we're bringing all these lucha stars into WCW and they're a part of us now, versus with AAA, we're working with them and we're maintaining their world. We're fitting into it because we've got people like Dominic and, others who are so familiar with the styles. That was tough in the 90s. Some of the luchadors you would see take on some of these American wrestlers, and you're like, there's no way they're going to have a good match. Like
Right.
Hacksaw Duggan taking on Super Colo. Never going to be a good match.
Right.
But when you've got and nowadays it's hard to be a wrestler without at least being somewhat familiar with the different styles from around the world.
Yeah.
It's a little bit easier to mesh these guys together now.
One thing we say here often, styles make fights. And, all these different styles and cultures coming together for this melting pot of wrestling. It's a good time to be a wrestling fan.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And the good thing is that, like we said, you can still go back and watch the old stuff.
Yeah.
It's really easy to find. One of my favorite wrestlers of all time is Kamala. And I just think that he was brilliant. And if you watch, it's character-driven. And he didn't have to speak, but he was so entertaining to watch and so underused. I think he could have been a monster world champion. They just didn't ever use him that way because he's not the type to speak up for himself.
Right.
So, there's a funny match where it was Bryan Danielson and Kamala. And you're like, how are these two going to have a match? They did. It was an all right match. It was, you talk about a clash of styles. Because those are two guys who know what
talk about different eras colliding. They're a couple eras removed from each other. So yeah, for sure. I know what you mean.
And it's two guys who know what their characters are and can go out and have a match with anybody. A great one to watch is from back in the day, Kamala and George Animal Steel. Two wild men. Because Kamala knows his character, George knows his character.
I'm going to ask this for Nick's sake. Is there a particular show where you can remember where those two meet that we can find on Peacock?
That's on YouTube.
That's on YouTube?
You can find it on YouTube. That's where I saw it.
Just like that AAA show last night, YouTube.
Yeah.
I love that they're making them available.
Yeah. There's and I think that half the time when I find stuff like that, I wasn't searching for it. It just came up as related content.
Sure.
So,
and sometimes those are the best finds.
Yeah. I was always a huge Kamala fan. And I had his LJN figure, and when I was a kid and I had the fake LJN Sergeant Slaughter figure that's worth $5 million now, but I no longer have it. But in my mind, I was in the wrestling ring, I was this is an independent show. They're in a ring, and the show's happening at an armory in New York, because that was another thing when I was really getting into wrestling. Yes, I read the major publications, but I read Wrestling Eye Magazine, Pro Wrestling Illustrated. I was aware that there was other stuff out there.
Sure.
That it wasn't just WWF, WCW.
Right.
So, and I think that's why also my expectations within wrestling were not, I'm going to become a big star. Because I could tell you off the top of my head probably 30 guys that were not big stars, but I considered great wrestlers. One really great, and I never knew it was the same person until many years later. Flyboy Rocco Rock from the Public Enemy. He was one of my favorite independent wrestlers ever, the Cheetah Kid. And I remember him on the independent circuit. And, he was a high flyer. He was really interesting. He had the cat mask on. And I was like, this is the type of wrestling, number one, that I want to go see, but this is the type of stuff I want to be involved with.
Right.
Because I want to wear the weird masks, and I want to have the bizarre little characters and that kind of stuff. And now, you just look it up on YouTube.
Yeah, look it up on YouTube, find that, and support indie wrestling nowadays, too, because you're going to find the stars of the future right in your backyard.
I mean, especially now that you've got, Black and Brave with their working arrangement with WWE. Not that everybody who goes through the school there will become a mega superstar, but it just goes to show you that, like, there's good talent going in and out. And you may not like every wrestler and you may not like every match at these shows, but realistically, when you watch it on TV, do you like everything anyway?
Right.
Right.
Chances are no.
There's
Yeah.
something for everyone.
Yep.
And I've been to big shows that companies put on. I've been to independent shows, and I have more fun at the independent stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, we are a little over the hour mark. I know we try and keep things right around there. We're respectful of everybody's time. Ripley, I want to thank you so much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure hearing your stories. Before we close out the show, Nick, you and I have a little business to take care of. Talk about what's coming up this weekend, and we've got a big announcement to make. Let's start with this weekend.
Yeah. This weekend coming up, this coming weekend, we are lending our superpowers to, along with Shotgun Wrestling Radio and the 2 Count podcast, for the Convergence Heroes for Hudson show. This is when podcasts collide, coming up this Saturday at 5:45. We are joining forces with 2 other podcasts to do the pre-show for the Heroes for Hudson Convergence show that's going on in Des Moines after the podcast at 7 o'clock. So we are definitely looking forward to that, getting together with the wrestling community. Of course, there's 3 podcasts teaming up here. There are 6 promotions in the state of Iowa that are teaming up for the show.
Yes.
So you'll get definitely some very cool matchups on the show. And it's, of course, all for a good cause. Of course, independent wrestling is just one big family anyways. So we hope to see you there if you weren't planning on going already.
And if you can't make the show, watch us. We'll be on the internet previewing it and hyping it up. So, but definitely, if you can make the show, it's going to be a hell of a time.
For sure.
I'm most excited for this, Nick, because coming at the beginning of September, we're starting a new show, a new monthly show with our good friend Joe Winkle.
We are?
We are.
Okay.
It's crazy.
Okay. I know. We're nuts. We're nuts.
So Tuesday, September 2nd will be the first episode of Wrestlebacks. What are Wrestlebacks? For us, it's rewatchable must-see matches. And we're going to start it off hot. We're going to kick it off with a great opening match for us, and that is Roman versus Cody from WrestleMania Night 239.
That's right. Big match. A lot going into that. Tune into WrestleBacks. You'll see why we picked that match. And this is a once-a-month show. Going back and finding something from the past, and we're going to have some fun with it. Of course, not only the Wizard and CZ and Never Wrong Nick Bull involved with it, we also have our good friend Joe Winkle, who has been on this show several times and is the host of Educated Ignorance and the Burden of the Bear podcasts. So we're looking forward to teaming up with him as we continue to profess our love to wrestling and share it with the world.
I'm excited. That's going to be a lot of fun, and we're going to pick some really good matches to go back from all eras. Of course, this weekend is also Forbidden Door coming from Costa Rica in London, and Heat Wave for NXT. So Nick and I are going to talk about those shows at some point. We just haven't worked out the details quite yet, so stay tuned to socials for that. But any final thoughts, gentlemen, before we put a bow on this episode?
No, I'm so glad we were able to hammer this down. We've been trying to get Ripley in here for a little bit and with booking, but we got him hammered down. It's been a while since we had talked, and I knew that he had a lot of cool wrestling stories to tell. So good to see your face again, Ripley.
Yeah, my biggest concern is just now with the trend in wrestling, how many puppets are too many puppets?
Hey, I kid you not. Do you know what they're selling that Demonisto Finn Balor puppet for? Did you see what the price is on WWE Shop?
I'm going to guess $50.
Times 2.
Ooh. Ooh.
And at some point,
$99.99, my friends.
Yeah.
$99.99 for a puppet.
yeah, that's going to be like the big Christmas present this year.
Right.
Yeah.
I just think that any kind of gimmick, you don't want to overdo it, and I'm just worried that's going to happen. So hopefully they'll kind of like calm it down.
I hope so too.
I didn't mind it for the moment, but the iguana thing is they're gonna have to tread lightly, I think, with that. I really do.
Yeah. And I heard a rumor that that's not actually a real iguana.
What?
Get out of here.
Heard it here first.
Okay.
Oh man.
Get going on that. Sleuths, find the answer if that is true or not. Ripley giving us a lead here on a Sunday night.
Again, Ripley, thank you so much for your time. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
We need to get together soon.
Yes, very much so.
Get together, watch some wrestling.
Oh, there you go.
All right.
Well, that is going to do it for this edition of Card Subject to Change. For my co-host, Never Wrong, Nick Bull, I am the Wizard CZ. We'll be back Wednesday with the Kickout, talking about AAA and Triple Mania. So that'll be fun, and then we'll be back here on Saturday for that Podcast Collide. So stay tuned. But in the meantime, go enjoy pro wrestling.
This has been a For Frequency's Sake Podcast Network production. For more great content, subscribe to For Frequency's Sake on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter.